From humble beginnings in the early 1970s, diligently serving the people of France as a popular and sturdy family runabout, to scaring the hell out of spectators and drivers alike on the dangerous and unpredictable rally stages of Europe, the Renault 5 is one of the world's most iconic cars. But did Le Car achieve enough to enjoy its place in the rarefied atmosphere of automotive adoration? Let's find out. This is the story of the Renault 5 Maxi Turbo. Firstly, as a normal road car, the R5 certainly earned its place. Released in 1972, the original R5 looked remarkably modern, especially from the front. And despite sharing quite a lot of its underpinnings with the older Renault 4, it quickly became France's most popular new car. With sales all over Europe and manufacturing facilities as far away as South Africa and Mexico. The R5 was the latest in a long line of humble hatchbacks, a style of car that France was, and still is, very well known for. Cheap, affordable transport for the masses. Not thrilling, but not everyone needs to be thrilled on their way to the shops. The R5 was many things, but one thing it certainly was not, was sporty. This isn't surprising. It was a car made for the cash-strapped and cost-conscious every people of, well, the world. Words like engaging or handling weren't uttered in development beyond engaging the handbrake or handling a pothole. Renault's recently acquired performance arm, however, Alpine, saw this as a missed opportunity, and they set about making a sportier version of the workhorse R5. They upgraded the engine from the largest 1.1 litre available as standard to a 1.4 litre capable of a hot 92 brake horsepower. Then they stiffened the suspension and they added anti-roll bars. The R5 Alpine could manage over 100 miles per hour and 0 to 60 in 9.7 seconds. Was it lightning fast? No. But for a Super Minnie in 1976, it was pretty unusual. They had built one of the world's first hot hatches, and it released in showrooms 2 months before Volkswagen's first Golf GTI. Renault had been watching the success of Lancia's Stratos on the rally stages of Europe. And inspired by the car, Jean Terramorsi, Renault's vice president of production, insisted that the company should try their hand at rallying with an R5. The only problem was that the Stratos, that had been seeing so much success, was mid-engined and rear-wheel drive, and Renault's 5 was front-engined and front-wheel drive. It'd take a radical rethink of the R5's design and mechanical layout to stand any chance at all of seeing success on a rally stage. Project 822 was born. A collaboration between the engineers at Alpine and the design geniuses at Bertone would see Terramorsi's vision come to life. Chief of design was the legendary Marcello Gandini, and the soon-to-be-famous new rear bodywork of the car was sketched by Marc Duchamp. Alpine had given Bertone an Alpine R5 as a base to work from, but it should come as a surprise to nobody that they threw most of it away. The 1.4 litre inline 4-cylinder engine from the Alpine R5 was retained in essence, but it was spiced up a bit. It was given better fuel injection, and just for good measure, it was also given a turbocharger. The result was much improved power output of 158 brake horsepower. But this was a minor change compared with what they did to the rest of the car. For starters, the engine would find a new home, this time behind the driver. They put it in the middle, just like the Stratos that had inspired the project to begin with. Also like the Stratos, they ditched the powered front wheels, choosing instead to send power to the rear wheels only. Just like a proper sports car. To achieve this, many of the cheap family car underpinnings had to be torn out and completely thrown away. They borrowed the rear suspension from an Alpine 310, and they nicked the gearbox from a Renault 30 TX. This wasn't an attempt at a dash of luxury, rather it was the only gearbox they had on hand that could cope with the increased power of the newly turbocharged engine. Project 822 was finally given a real name, the Renault 5 Turbo. and it was the single most powerful French production car money could buy in 1980. And yes, money could indeed buy it. Though the car was explicitly designed for Group 4 rally, cars in the class had to meet road homologation requirements, including the production of at least 400 road-legal examples. The time had come. Renault believed they had a car that could take on the rally stages of Europe and win, so that's what they did. They shipped it off to the WRC. The car hadn't been homologated for the beginning of the 1980 season, and the only points they scored that year were at the Tour de Corse. And let's just say, it wasn't very many points. They finished 13th in the manufacturer's standings, but given they'd missed quite a lot of events, it's not a fair representation of the car's ability and overall performance. For 1981, Renault had already upgraded their R5, and it now produced 180 brake horsepower. Prepped for a full season entry, maybe this time Renault could properly flex their muscles. That same year, Audi had homologated their Quattro for use in Group 4 rally. The four-wheel drive technology that Audi had developed for its Quattro would go on to change rally forever. But at the time, the mid-engined rear-wheel drive layout that Renault had brought seemed just as likely to be an advantage as Audi's four-wheel drive. And there was only one way to find out which was best. And Audi's four-wheel drive had to do a lot of work to get the big front-engined car to go around anything resembling a corner. That being said, the Renault did have its own problems. It was small, mid-engined, rear-wheel drive, and its track width had been increased so much the car was almost square. In conditions with plenty of grip, this is a formula that works really well. But Renault drivers were quickly discovering that on looser stages, such as gravel, the car was becoming dangerously unpredictable. Frankly, this was not ideal for a rally championship, but it was locked in now, there was nothing they could do. The car's ability on the road won it the 1981 Monte Carlo rally in the hands of Jean Ragnotti, but that would be the only major highlight of the season for Renault, who had managed just 7th place in the championship standings come season end. That said, they weren't far behind Audi, who gained just 2 more points across the length of the season. They hadn't yet managed to convince everyone that Quattro really was the superior way of doing things that they had promised. The 1981 Constructors' Championship went to Talbot, and the Drivers' Champion was the legendary Ari Vatanen in a Ford Escort RS 1800. 1982 was yet more of the same for the little Renault. They managed to win the Tour de Corse, but that was it. It did give them 6th place in the championship overall, but undoubtedly they were hoping for more. That said, the field was getting crowded now as manufacturers joined ahead of the highly anticipated 1983 regulation changes. Quattro reigned supreme in 1982, winning the Constructors' Championship, and their driver Walter Röhrl winning the Drivers' Championship. 1983 was a very exciting year for rally fans, of which there was more than ever before. The Group 4 regulations had been revised and had become Group B. Group B is a term that sends shivers down the spines of car folks all over the world. To many, it symbolises a golden age in motorsport development, and to others it's a reminder of just how dangerous motorsport really is. Both may be true, but the seeds were sown and the stage was set by Group 4. And the old-timers weren't about to stop competing now. For 1983, the R5 was upgraded yet again to produce more power, now up to 210 brake horsepower. The new regulations presented a problem for Renault, however. While the new Group B regulations were much looser than the old Group 4 regulations that had spawned the R5, Renault found themselves in an awkward limbo. As simply as possible, Group B cars were governed by their engine displacement. A larger engine meant a higher minimum weight. Cars that used forced induction, so turbochargers or superchargers, had a multiplier applied to their engine displacement. Renault's problem was that it fell into the lowest class. Now you'd be forgiven for thinking that that was a good thing, because it could run much lighter than some of the other cars, but there was a snag. The heavier and more powerful cars were allowed to run wider tyres. The R5 Turbo was already skittish in the handling department, and now with even more power and no extra grip, the drivers had a real challenge on their hands. Unsurprisingly, with all of this in mind, the R5 Turbo didn't perform very well in 1983. They managed 5th place in the championship overall, but the gap to the leading 4 was enormous. And to add salt to the wound, Lancia's take on a mid-engined rear-wheel drive car was the car that won the championship. It was the true successor to the Stratos that had inspired Renault to begin with. Clearly the concept did have potential, just Renault hadn't found it yet. 1984 was another 5th place finish for Renault. And with Audi's Quattro back at the front of the grid, the engineers at Renault Sport finally decided to put their heads together and try and make something new. Renault chose to take advantage of Group B's evolution rules. This was a set of rules that governed how upgraded cars could be homologated for the competition. In a nutshell, the cabin, core chassis components and drivetrain elements had to remain the same, but extensive modification could be done to the front and rear of the car, as long as 20 more road legal examples with the new upgrades were produced. That's exactly what Renault did, and they didn't waste the effort. They made big aerodynamic changes at both the front and rear of the car, and crucially they bored out the engine to 1.5 litres, which after applying the multiplier for the turbocharger moved the car up to the next class, and it was able to take advantage of wider tyres, giving the drivers some much needed extra grip, which they'd need because the engine now produced 360 brake horsepower. Dubbed the Renault 5 Maxi Turbo, the new car immediately proved that the upgrades had at least had some effect, as Jean Ragnotti won the 1985 Tour de Corse. However, with the car still only being rear-wheel drive, it proved almost completely uncompetitive on loose surface events, in the face of ever more advanced four-wheel drive machines. The WRC ground to a halt before the end of the 1986 season, after a series of tragic accidents. The Group B rules had brought the sport to the very forefront of motorsport, but it had also brought the sport to its knees. Group B was dead. While the Renault 5 Turbo was never able to achieve the success of some of Group B's better known legends, it was a home favourite in France, with many teams and individuals running Renault 5 Turbos in the French Rally Championship and other regional rally championships for years after the end of Group B in WRC. Its quirky origins and truly unique styling make it easy to love. And the concept was sound. There's no better example of this than the Lancia 037 that had embarrassed Audi in 1983, which you can learn all about here. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and until next time, goodbye.